Hello, good afternoon, good morning, good evening, wherever in the world you are. Zimbabweans are going to the polls tomorrow to vote for the presidential race, parliamentary, senators, and local councillors. These elections are flawed. Zanu PF is going to rig these elections. It is interesting that many, even some of the hardcore Zanu PF apologists, are now also admitting that these elections are flawed. This is an extract from a debate that took place in South Africa, where one of the Zanu PF apologists was one of the panelists. And even he acknowledged these elections are not going to be free, fair, and credible. So let's just listen to the debate. I will not punish you by playing the whole thing, just an extract from it.
The video.
But then let me start with you. Just give us a sense, just to kick us off, give us a sense of the political climate in Zimbabwe. Would you say that it's a climate, in a sense, appropriate and fertile for a democratic and fair and free election at the moment?
Thank you so much, JJ. Zimbabwe is not a fertile environment for free and fair elections.
Rutendo.
I think most of us know that Zimbabwe has been under sanctions, illegal unilateral sanctions by the United States, the Europeans, Canada, and Australians for the past 22 years. And when you read the policy statement of the Zidera sanctions, they are clear that they want to assist the Zimbabwean people to achieve democratic change, not democracy. So what it means is that people in Zimbabwe are being punished collectively by sanctions, deprived of water, healthcare, education, food, so that they are forced to vote for the opposition that happens to be called the Movement of Democratic Change. And so this is something that started 2 months before the Movement of Democratic Change was created. Just 2 months before they were created, the Zimbabwean government all of a sudden had the multilateral lending institutions of the International Development Association and the IMF refusing to give them loans. And they refused to give them loans even though they had not failed to pay any of their loans. The reason was the West knew that they were bringing in a puppet government that they wanted to then force Zimbabweans to vote for so that they stop land reform and so that they take out the soldiers of Zimbabwe that were in Congo fighting against the Rwandans and the Ugandans who wanted to remove Laurent Kabila. Those political interests were the ones that saw the creation of the Movement of Democratic Change and the assistance of that movement by sanctions that started by the Zimbabwean government being denied development and reconstruction loans. When that failed to get MDC to win a majority in parliament, they put in the Zidera sanctions, which are clear because Biden was one of the sponsors together with Hillary Clinton, Helms. They say that we want to punish the Zimbabwean people. We want to make the Zimbabwean economy scream until they vote for democratic change. And so once you've got sanctions,
this is not pure coincidence of nomenclature or as they call it, just labeling. You are specifically saying that those calls were to vote for a particular opposition party.
Yes. And remember, there's this study that has been done by a professor from the New Jersey University in 2018, Professor Boisio Park. He actually said that sanctions, he's got a study called The Impact of Sanctions on Incumbent Governments. He says that sanctions are there to punish an economy and to cause economic problems that force people to give votes to the opposition over the incumbent. And he has proved that by having the case study of MDC in that particular study, saying that they only won seats in parliament in 2000, because of the monies that were denied the government of Zimbabwe. And Morgan Tsvangirai was only able to get 43% of the vote in the 2002 presidential elections because of the sanctions, and we've had that pattern.
If we just park that theory just a little bit, would you say to me, looking straight in my eye, that after 40 years or however long Zanu PF has been in power, would you argue that there's no need for change? Let's forget about what the Americans and whatever want. Let's talk about Zimbabweans who are flocking here. There are about 6 million of them here.
Let's look internally.
Right? Because they are feeling the pinch of economic, if you like, deprivation. Would you say that if you set aside just what the Americans want, the citizens, a good part of the population, think that there's a need for some sort of change in Zimbabwe?
Well, I don't think that the citizens believe that there should be change, because last year, the last elections, they gave Zanu PF a 2/3 supermajority. And that supermajority was strengthened to 70% over the by-elections. And the opposition never queried the results because the results were fair and what people want. Why? Because Zanu PF has been deconstructing colonialism in Zimbabwe. That means breaking down the bricks of colonialism and rebuilding. And Zimbabweans understand that. And now they've begun to actually get results out of that rebuilding. That's why we've got a maize surplus. We're exporting maize to Rwanda this year. We're exporting maize to Congo this year. Wheat, we've got a wheat surplus. We are wheat self-sufficient. Yet countries like South Africa haven't been wheat self-sufficient since 1989. We've got tobacco surpluses. We've beaten the gold production, and we're building infrastructure. We're eliminating load shedding by building our own.
But why are so many Zimbabweans fleeing? If there's such largesse there, I mean, I'm a bit confused. Are you saying that we must find other reasons other than economic deprivation that there are so many Zimbabweans that are fleeing to all parts of the world? I think we stay in Zimbabwe.
I think we've made it clear that Zimbabwe is under illegal unilateral sanctions that are persecuting Zimbabweans, depriving them water, healthcare, education, which is a crime against humanity.
I think we can stop there. The single most important thing here is that, unfortunately, this debate, like many other such gathering, unfortunately, there was not really any sensible address of the issues here. When the other guests did speak, they failed to address some of those issues. For instance, in this particular case, of course, our apologist does not admit that Zimbabwe has failed to hold free, fair, and credible elections ever since the country's independence. There were no sanctions then. And as for the IMF and the World Bank and other economic institutions refusing to give Zanu PF funding in the late 1990s, it's totally untrue that which is claiming here that although Zanu PF was paying his debt, it wasn't paying his debt. That was precisely the point. Zimbabwe had gone through the economic structural adjustment program in 1990 to 1995. That failed to put the country's economy back on track. And so they had another 5-year economic structural adjustment program. And by the end of it, it was still clear that the reforms were not going to restart the Zimbabwe economy. And Robert Mugabe himself was blaming IMF for it and failing to pay to service the country's debt. And that's where the IMF said, well, if you're not servicing your own debt, then we can't keep on extending more loans to you. And the World Bank followed the same suit, and most of the other Western financial institutions did the same thing. And so to say that it was because although Zimbabwe was still paying servicing its debt is totally untrue. That is not factual. What is interesting actually about that is that Mugabe then had his look east policy. And from it, he started working with China and Russia. China in particular, whose economy was doing very well. And initially, the Chinese were forthcoming in giving Zimbabwe financial assistance in the various projects. But it soon became clear that the country was not repaying its loans. And so the amount of financial assistance that Zimbabwe was getting became less and less. In other words, China stopped giving Zimbabwe financial assistance for the same reason that the IMF and the World Bank had stopped in the late 1990s. And this became a serious issue, actually. And that was the reason why Mugabe complained about it in 2015-16, and ended up kicking the Chinese out of the Marange and Chiadzwa diamond in exasperation. It was a big mistake, of course, because in 2017, he himself was booted out of office. And many believe that the Chinese played a role in the coup of 2017. So in this case, it is totally untrue to keep blaming. In this particular case, now we have reached the point where sanctions are being blamed why we are not having free, fair, and credible elections. Totally nonsensical. Zimbabwe has not been holding free and fair elections long before the sanctions were imposed. What is also interesting here is that our friend later on was being asked about some of the oppressive laws, like the most recent one, this Patriotic Bill, and he was at pains to explain that it was enacted because the opposition, particularly the opposition leaders, were working with foreign governments to impose sanctions on the nation that is punishing everybody. The funny part of it is that Zanu PF itself is on record calling the opposition, and to be quite honest, any critic of the regime, if they are black, they are called a puppet of the West, an Uncle Tom. And yet when it comes to sanctions, all of a sudden, Zanu PF has flipped. Now, all of a sudden, the people they've been calling puppets, they accuse them of being so powerful that they are the ones writing the foreign policies of big countries like America, the European Union, and so forth. You campaigned for sanctions to be imposed on Zimbabwe, and that's why we are punishing you. And right now, after the passing of this Patriotic Bill, anyone accused of meeting any foreign government officials or foreigners at all in a situation that Zanu PF government is not reflected in good light, is under threat of being incarcerated under that bill. So now we have now walked all the way around now, where we're looking at a situation where this Patriotic Bill has been enacted to punish the puppet for speaking to the puppeteer, which is nonsense, of course. How can the puppet now control the puppeteer? The main problem comes back to these elections. One of the things that we have also encountered, which must be mentioned here, is that the opposition had the opportunity to implement meaningful democratic reforms during the GNU. They failed to implement even one token reform. There is no denying that by participating in these flawed elections, the opposition are giving Zanu PF legitimacy. One of the biggest problems we keep having here is that SADC, the regional body, did play a positive role during the GNU in creating an environment that if Morgan Tsvangirai and company had not sold out, they would have implemented the democratic reforms and thus get the country out of this mess. And they did try to nag Morgan Tsvangirai and his colleagues into the right direction to implement the reforms, but alas, without success. In fact, during that time, Zanu PF operatives boasted that mazwane MDC adzidza kudya Nyerere. When they were asked why was MDC guys not implementing even one meaningful reform. In other words, MDC leaders had learned to enjoy the gravy train, the benefits of the gravy train, life's good life. They will never rock the boat. They will never implement any meaningful reform. And that is exactly what happened. And SADC, in total despair, decided to acknowledge the results, despite the fact that they are flawed, and thus grant Zanu PF political legitimacy. In June 2013, for the record, SADC leaders called a special SADC meeting in Maputo, in which they urged Morgan Tsvangirai and company not to participate in the 2013 elections without reforms. And Morgan Tsvangirai and company ignored the warning. And SADC in despair said, okay, let the elections go ahead. And lo and behold, Zanu PF rigged the elections and SADC just endorsed them, granted Zanu PF legitimacy. SADC came back to do the same thing in 2018. What I hope that SADC will realize now is just that that wasn't going to solve anything. Zimbabwe is a failed state because we have failed to hold free, fair, and credible elections. And here is a Zanu PF apologist admitting that these elections are not going to be free, fair, and credible. And I hope SADC election observers who are in Harare right now, in Zimbabwe right now, to observe these elections will take this on board. These elections are not free, fair, and credible. How can you have free, fair, and credible elections when you do not even have a verified voters roll? How can you say you've got free, fair, and credible elections when you know the amount of violence and intimidation is such that the ordinary person has been reduced into a medieval serf, beholden to these Zanu PF thugs? It is clear that the whole election process has been maneuvered to the point where it is impossible to have free, fair, and credible elections. Zimbabwe has got so many polling stations. When you look at the number of polling stations, you can see immediately there's something going on here. In 2008, there were about 10 polling stations in each of the constituencies. In 2013, that number was increased from 2,000 to over 9,000. In 2018, that was increased again to over 11,000. And this year, it's over 12,000. That means they've got more than where you had 10 polling stations in a constituency. Now you've got over 60. Why? Simple. Zanu PF is, particularly in the rural areas, is monitoring who goes into each polling station, because now the voters' roll is by polling station. In 2008, it was by constituency. You could go into any one of those 10 polling stations and your name will be on the voters' roll and you'll be able to vote. Now you can only go to the polling station. It's a polling station-based voters' roll. And in this case, Zanu PF operatives will be outside each polling station. They will have a polling station voters' roll. They will be able to mark, even if they, particularly in the rural areas, they will know you by name. But even if they don't know you by name, they will at least know you. Sorry, if they don't know you by face, they will know you by name. They will be able to mark who goes into each polling station to vote tomorrow. And from that list, they know who is their own members and who are not Zanu PF supporters. And the vote counting is done by polling station. And so by the time the polling station results is out, within an hour, they will be able to say, okay, 500 people went in to vote. We know that 200 of those were Zanu PF supporters. Let's look at the result. If 200 voted for Zanu PF, they will say, yeah, these are the ones, our members. All the others, and they've got your name, your address, everything. These did not vote for Zanu PF. Your vote is no longer a secret. This is particularly important in the rural areas, where the level of intimidation is most acutely felt. So if these elections are such that your vote is not a secret, and the party is able to monitor, and in fact, President Mnangagwa himself has been boasting about that your vote is not a secret. How can we say these elections are free, fair, and credible? SADC has got to reverse its position of 2013 and 2018 and stop endorsing these elections as free, fair, and credible. This is not helping Zimbabwe at all. Even Zanu PF apologists are admitting that these elections are not going to be free, fair, and credible. The only reason why the opposition keep participating is they're doing so out of greed. They themselves have admitted that these elections are not free, fair, and credible. I have shown here comments from the likes of Tendai Biti and David Coulthard, Zanu PF, some of the senior PF leaders themselves admitting that very fact. This is Tendai Biti admitting the fact that the problem here is the whole election process is so flawed. It really is totally futile to keep on participating in these elections. Tendai Biti is the vice president of PF, one of the 3 vice presidents of PF. And David Coulthard is actually the party's secretary general. And that was him writing in his book following the 2013 elections. David Coulthard went one step further to admit why opposition still keep participating. Greed. I think it is irresponsible for SADC, as much as they were disappointed by MDC during the GNU and by MDC's failure to heed to their warning that you should not participate in the 2013 elections without reforms. SADC cannot keep on punishing corrupt and incompetent MDC leaders by granting Zanu PF legitimacy. This is collective punishment at its worst. The whole nation is being punished because MDC leaders are corrupt and incompetent. This has got to stop. SADC leaders, SADC election observers have been sent to Zimbabwe to observe the election process, to see whether it is possible to have free, fair, and credible elections in Zimbabwe, to see whether this election process is free, fair, and credible. There is no way you can tell me anyone could be so totally blind to the realities on the ground to pretend that this is a free, fair, and credible process. I think SADC should stop thinking of, well, even if they're not free, fair, and credible, what else can we do? It is not SADC's responsibility to come up with a solution of what next. That is not SADC's responsibility. SADC observers are there to observe whether these elections are free, fair, and credible. And as a regional body, the responsibility is to decide whether to grant Zanu PF political legitimacy. If the elections are flawed, they are flawed. Don't grant Zanu PF political legitimacy. What happens if you don't grant Zanu PF political legitimacy? Well, in 2008, that led to SADC forcing Zanu PF to sign the global political agreement that led to the GNU. Yes, the GNU was a total failure. Yes, it was SADC's fault that the GNU failed to implement even one meaningful reform. That was purely the failure by MDC in particular. Nonetheless, SADC should not look at it as that this is going to be their responsibility. It is not. all SADC have got to say here is come up with a judgment on this electoral process. Is this free, fair, and credible process? If the answer is no, then don't grant Zanu PF unwarranted political legitimacy. As to what will happen next, I think in this particular case, SADC did play an active role in 2008. They failed. I think there are other bodies like the UN that could now step in and help Zimbabwe out of this mess. It is not for SADC to come up with a solution this time. Zimbabweans, together with the other international bodies like the UN, can come up with a solution. These elections are not free, fair, and credible. There is no point in let's wait and see. We already know. The evidence is already overwhelming that these elections are not free, fair, and credible. We don't have to wait for people to go tomorrow and vote, because we already know that that process is flawed. And tomorrow we'll gather even more evidence to that effect. But what must be emphasized here and now is that this process is flawed, and we should stop giving Zanu PF unwarranted political legitimacy. Zimbabwe is not going to get out of this mess by falsely pretending that we are holding free and fair and credible elections. In fact, Zimbabwe is a failed state primarily because we have failed to hold free, fair, and credible elections for the last 43 years. It is deeply regrettable that the opposition that was entrusted with that task sold out. But we are where we are. We need to move on. We cannot punish the whole country just because MDC leaders sold out. That is the message that I would like to leave with many people out there. As for Zimbabweans tomorrow, as they go to vote, biggest contribution you can make in these elections is to gather even more evidence to show that this process is flawed. Those who have decided to participate, personally, I would say you should not participate in a process, because once you've participated, it's very difficult to then turn around and say it was flawed. Why did you participate when you knew all along that the process is flawed? Still, we know that there's many people who want to participate, but gathering even more evidence of how flawed the process is would be helpful. For instance, those who participate and find, for instance, that their name is not on the voters' roll, they should speak out. The election observers would not know that you failed to vote because your name was not in the voters' roll unless you tell them. If all these election observers are told and somebody keeps a tally of the number of people who have gone into a polling station and found their name is not on the voters' roll. And therefore, then they've been denied the vote. That cannot be ignored. It is not the voters' fault. ZEC was asked 1,000 times to produce a verified voters' roll. They refused. So it is not your fault if tomorrow you go, you turn up and you find your name is not on the voters' roll. Just make sure that that is noted. Somebody takes note of it. This madness has got to be stopped. And as much evidence, if it's gathered, the better. We must not give SADC election observers the excuse to endorse this flawed election and grant Zanu PF political legitimacy at the end of it. Zimbabwe cannot afford another 5 years of this failed state. That is the truth. Thank you and good night.